is our night. This is
our show.
On this night, we rise.
This is the bleeding edge of science, technology, and ethics. This is
Evolution, unwilling to submit.
We learn all that is learnable.
Tonight, power shifts. Tonight, we raise our instruments of anarchy.
Peaceful coexistence, encryption, software, secure devices, and our minds.
Tonight, we are unbound by law.
It's time for Sovryn Tech. And now your host, the golden stallion of the tech world, the rated R radio star, Brian Sovryn.
Woo! What does it take for the golden stallion to do this show? Well, in the words of one of the big boys over at Apple, Phil Schiller, or as I like to call him, woo, Phil the Shill, it takes courage. Woo, courage. And you'll know what all that means in a second, but right now, woo, you better hold on. Because this is about to get bumpy, baby. Because the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, the world's most interesting anarchist, as some say, the Dr. No of the tech world, as others would say, is ready to go one more time. Woo, baby! It's time for that Sovryn Tech, and let's break right into it. Oh, man. I hope you can get through it, brother, because this is going to be so loaded. I have so many things to cover. I don't know how I'm going to get it inside of 2 hours, but we've got a lot to talk about. A lot of it is very timely, so I want to get into it. Okay, I have to get into it this week if perhaps people want to take advantage or disadvantage of what some of the things I'm going to talk about is. But, oh, man, and I don't even know where to start. I really don't know where to start. There are so many stories to get into. We're not going to do one main story. I mean, there's going to be, 3-4 main stories, and they all kind of interweave. They're all connected, man. Woo, it's all connected, man. And I'm going to prove it, like the Golden Stallion does every single week on this show. Now, why don't we go ahead? Let's do some random access. Let's warm things up a bit. But if you don't think I'm already warmed up, whoo, I'm warmed up. But let's talk about it. Actually, I'm going to start off with something that I might end up being wrong. I talked about maybe 2-3 weeks ago. There was Mozilla was announcing that Firefox, they are switching over to Chrome's model of memory management for the web browser. And I said, I don't really care for that. I don't like that style where everything is a separate process and all this. I like it all to be one process. I mean, if for no other reason alone than when I'm using Windows, to be able to actually shut down the web browser, say I have to do a hard shutdown, end process and all that, through the task manager. Like, try shutting down Chrome if you want to shut it down entirely. I mean, you have to flip through. I mean, you can say that, well, you just go through the one that's using the most. That doesn't always work that way. But, I mean, it's not so much a problem with Linux, but then, of course, Chrome isn't as much a problem on Linux as it is on Windows either. But regardless, anyway, I said I didn't care for that much, that I think there's problems, and I still, hold to the fact that I think there are issues with that kind of, memory management model where it's so many separate processes. But supposedly, in, of course, Mozilla's own labs, they are finding out that this new multi-process architecture that they're using is giving them 400 to 700% increases in responsiveness. Now, that's not exactly speed. Using the word responsiveness is very particular. Okay, and using it in, kind of these best case scenarios, at Mozilla, I find that to be questionable as well. All these statistics we've talked about it, like with the claims that Microsoft was making with Edge, the claims that Opera makes, all these different web browser claims. I mean, they're super particular with the language, and they're often under some degree of best conditions, which does not reflect the real world, in my opinion. So that would help a lot. If some of these guys would just say, in their opinion, we could be like, okay, well, you're making that claim. We'll see how it shapes up when it actually gets out here. But whatever. Anyway, so supposedly there will be a 400 to 700% increase in responsiveness. I believe this will be fully implemented with Firefox version 50. If it does, okay, great. I guess I'll take the extra responsiveness. I'm not going to switch to Chrome, or, I'm not switching, elsewhere. But it remains to be seen. I really want to see that proof. I want to see that hard data when it gets out into the real world, just how, what that responsiveness looks like. And again, pay close attention to that word. It's funny. It just struck me the other day. Speaking of Firefox Quick, it just hit me the other day when I was going into a private mode on there. Like, Firefox has this purple Venetian mask, kind of like you'd see in Eyes Wide Shut, right, during the orgy scene. And I just saw that and go you know what? I love that, man. That is so good. And I think Mozilla knows the sex they're selling when they put that on there. You see that? You just instantly feel naughty. You've got that shield, and then you've got that Venetian mask, saying, ho, you go do what you want to do right now, baby. Ooh, yeah. It feels like that. So anyway, I love it. I think that's wonderful. Something else, actually, that'll lead into the next bit of random access, that the WebVR standard is starting to get really, really highly developed by pretty much every major browser company out there. Microsoft just announced that Microsoft Edge is putting WebVR, into Edge itself, which they probably couldn't have done with Internet Explorer. It really speaks well of them, going with with a totally new web browser, that being, Microsoft Edge, and really leaving, Internet Explorer in the dust, except for when compatibility, old compatibility issues are needed to be resolved. So WebVR is allowing for virtual reality internet. Firefox, I think, was really on top of this. Certainly W3C was, which is, largely... Mozilla has a lot of sway in that group. Let's just put it that way. That doesn't explain the particulars. But anyway, everybody's getting on board with WebVR. I think that's wonderful. I look forward to this, being pushed more. And honestly, if it's in Edge, okay. Like I said, I'm not telling people to go use Microsoft products. I'm not even telling you to use Edge. But let's be clear here that it is the number 2, or I think it's actually maybe the most secure. I think it beat out Chrome, or maybe it was number 2 at the recent Pwn contest. You can say this because it's not a hot target. Well, maybe that's true, but whatever. You want to talk about some statistics that are legit. That's one of them. So, it's a secure browser, and hey, and if it's going to get all this stuff built in, like now it has extensions and all that, fucking great. I always tell you, software minimalism is a thing. It's something people need to practice more. Software minimalism is that you install the least amount of software possible, and sometimes you even use the default software to keep from creating further security gateways and exploits. Okay, it's a security concept that people can take advantage of, especially people that aren't so tech savvy. I think it's a fine thing to do. Okay, now, you want to watch out for the tyranny of the default, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, let's move on from that. Speaking of VR, this was interesting, and I kind of get it and I don't get it at the same time. I think this is going to end up being a gimmick. And these are the ideas that are getting pressed, the one I'm about to tell you. These are the kinds of ideas that are getting some serious press. And I think that's why a lot of people, even very smart people in the tech world, will tell you that they think VR is really just a gimmick still, which I just totally disagree with. It is not just a gimmick. But what's happening is now there are going to be theaters that are going to have what's called IMAX VR. Okay, now, this does not mean that you're going to go into an IMAX theater, you're going to watch, the latest movie, whatever, you're going to go see Star Wars Rogue One, and you are going to be completely immersed in the film. It is not that. And in fact, if it was that, why go to an IMAX theater? Just sell people the fucking headset. It absolutely is not about doing that. But what it is about doing, I also think that's why can't people just do this at home? It doesn't make sense. The idea is that there is going to be a separate room, an exit stage left, or perhaps stage right, depending where you are in the theater, in an IMAX theater, where you can go into another room, put on a headset, and then you could sort of, explore parts of this world after you see the movie. I guess that way there aren't any spoilers. probably the first place that this is going to get done in, based upon the articles that I read, the examples they gave, not that they said this was going to be a thing for it, but the examples of, like, well, how would this work? Well, what if you were on Avatar and you ended up going, to that whole planet where, what it begins with a P, I forget the name of it, the planet where, where Avatar takes place on. You could actually go into another room after the movie and explore it, and that would be part of the ticket price. I think that's pretty much a quiet admission that that's where you're first going to see this, is on the new Avatar films. Because remember, we've got like 5 or 6 of those coming out, or 5 of them, I think, in, the next like 6-7 years, or however James Cameron can work it out. I'm intrigued to see them. But anyway, so I don't get it, and it really doesn't make sense. Like, I could see this being really good for home video, but really, it's ironic because embracing virtual reality actually kills the movie theater. Because when virtual reality gets good enough to where I think people would pay an extra ticket price to explore parts of that world, when virtual reality is that good, you just create a virtual theater on your fucking headset while you're sitting on your couch at home. There's no need to go, to go somewhere. And invite your friends over to your house. So really, IMAX is probably trying to, get in on the VR thing and make themselves seem like they're ahead and trying to create some sort of unique experiences. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more than the simple way that I described it. But at the end of the day, they've got to know, like every theater has to know, VR is going to just end their business. Unless, it's more of a, what would you call that? A boutique style theater, where it's a theater designed to give you that original feeling, right? Like I remember there was in Rome, New York, when I lived in upstate New York. In Rome, there was, an art institute there, and they would actually hold, they had a very old style theater there, from 100 years previous, and they would hold, they would play over the summer like movie festivals, and they would bring in a pianist, and, and everybody else to kind of like play like the piano, like used to be done, 100 years ago when they're playing a silent movie and everything. And you went there for that sort of event and, and to hang out with people, and or they'd even play later films. Like they'd play, they'd play classic, Gojira or Godzilla films. And I remember I'd go there, with a good buddy and maybe some others. And every time Mothra would come out, we'd all, stand up and go, Mothra! We'd sing the whole thing. And then it becomes an event, you know what I mean? And so in those cases, yes, I could see the theater still existing. But as far as for everything else, as far as, with VR, where's VR going to take things? Really, it's going to end IMAX, because then IMAX becomes redundant, pointless. So anyway, they're trying to get on top of it. We'll see how it works out for them. Boys, speaking of watching things, and we're going to get into a ton of tech news here in just a minute. Speaking of watching things, the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy and I, of course, we are entertainment cohorts, we watched a show that I thought was interesting. It was actually, for what it was pretty good. It's called Startup. This is not the podcast. This is a show. It's on the online network Crackle. It has Adam Brody in it, which Adam Brody you might remember from, he was like in Scream 4 or a bunch of those other kind of movies. And I think he actually created the show, which is interesting. But anyway, it is a show all about a digital cryptocurrency. But I repeat myself. Maybe. But anyway, but it's all about a cryptocurrency called GenCoin, as in, I'm guessing, like Genesis. Now, what's interesting is that going into seeing this, or, watching this, and only the first episode's available. I don't know when the rest of the other episodes are going to be available, but the first episode's available now to watch. I was expecting, what little I knew about it was that this would be a fictionalized version of Bitcoin and of the Bitcoin story. Probably like they would end up going down, towards the Silk Road part of the story, all this different stuff. But it's not actually in the first episode. I'm not, spoiler alerts, I guess. I don't believe in spoiler alerts. I think, holding people's tongues hostage is really terrorism. But whatever, spoiler alert, even though this isn't one, the Bitcoin, they mention Bitcoin in it. And because they ask, well, how is GenCoin different from Bitcoin? And so Bitcoin, so it is kind of it's an altcoin. I guess that's really the best way to say it. It is a show about an altcoin, and it is definitely a show about, to some degree, a seedy underworld of sorts. It takes place in Miami, and you have Haitians, kind of like a Haitian mafia style thing. You have all this different stuff. But for what it was pretty good. In fact, holy shit, some of the first things I look for were there. Even though you didn't see, you didn't see any nip, you didn't see, any dick, you didn't see, you didn't see any pussy, you didn't see anything like that. Within the first 15 minutes, there were already 3 sex scenes. I mean, and they were as explicit as they could be without, showing the full deal. So I was like, okay, great. One was in a shower scene. The other, it opened up pretty much with a sex scene. Now, here's the thing with that. I'll tell you this much. I won't spend a lot of time talking about this show. And I hope you don't find any of that to be a spoiler. That there's actually 4 sex scenes. How about that? in the whole thing. I worry a lot of shows can start off really strong. Of course, a lot of shows can start up weak and end up going very strong. Think of like Spartacus, where, the first couple episodes are a little rough, or Babylon 5, where the first couple seasons, are a little debatable, but then once you're in the 3rd season, it's the greatest show ever made. But a lot of shows will start showing sex like very early on, and it's just to get people watching, to have the sex appeal there. And if that's one thing I'll tell you, like I said, the first episode was pretty good, but if it trails off of the sex, I'm going to be ticked off. I keep the sex in it, and no, I do not get tired of it, and bullshit that anybody else ever gets tired of sex. Are you kidding me? So, well, at least not with varying people. Anyway, leave that in. And I'm a little worried too. A lot of shows, like there's a show Halt and Catch Fire, which I really like, but admittedly, so that's all about the creation of a lot of different events. It's kind of a remix of the history of personal computing. And admittedly, it really has turned into a show that, as true to the era as it is, and I love it for that, to where there's very genuine Commodore 64s and a lot of genuine equipment in there, and they spend a lot of time making sure everything looks legit, like it's the 1980s and sounds like the 1980s and all that. It's really just become a character play. And it's not so much about the technology anymore. Now, I want the character play, but I don't want you to leave the technology behind. So I'm a little worried that this is just going to end up being a show where it's really just about the characters and sort of the tech is just a backstory instead of it being an equal partner or it being at the forefront. That was the beauty of Star Trek, right? Which we might talk about Star Trek later on. The beauty of Star Trek was that the tech was a character in itself. The ship was a character in itself. You cared about as much about it as you did, Kirk and Spock and McCoy or Picard or whoever. So I hope they keep the tech in the forefront and they could do very interesting things. And I don't mind if they just, kind of do a fictionalized version of some of the history of Bitcoin. I think that'd be great. And, but Bitcoin kind of sits on the side. But I was really expecting it to, for it to be more about Bitcoin, just with a different name. But whatever, it is what it is. You can check it out. Like I said, I thought it was enjoyable. I think the Loving Hyperintelligence, Dr. Stephanie Murphy also thought that it was actually very good, at least the first episode. She's giving me the thumbs up right now from the producer's chair. Woo! And it was good. So check that out, and don't hesitate to torrent it if you want to. But anyway, let's see. Oh, here's another one. We'll get through just a little bit more random access, and then we got a ton of stories. We're going to be talking Apple, but I've got a lot more to talk about than just Apple. We're going to talk Synereo. We're going to talk Monero. We're going to talk Dash. We got a ton of shit to get into. Okay, so bear with me here. But this one is important because, as I've said, I've recently significantly decreased the amount of ways within which you can interact with the show or that you can talk to the show. And one of really the 2 or 3 left is Twitter. Of course, there's Twitter, email, Patreon. Those are the 3 ways, to interact with the show. And Twitter is, they just announced some big changes with their DM section, with direct messaging. And I don't mind what they did. Like, pretty much what they did is they allow for previews of links, which I think is very important, especially for security and, in general. I don't recommend, clicking unless somebody has had a previous conversation with you in any kind of messaging platform, Twitter's direct messaging or Facebook Messenger or whatever. Unless somebody says something to you or says your name or gives some kind of specific information, I wouldn't click on any link. So it's a little bit helpful for there to be link previews in direct messenger. I think that's a fine thing. Facebook Messenger does the same. That's okay. The other major thing that they added in that I don't like, but there's a caveat that I don't like, is read receipts. Read receipts meaning that when you've seen when people will know you've seen their direct message that they sent, because there'll be a little checkbox, just like it is on Facebook Messenger. Now, I don't like that because I feel like it sort of it kind of pressures you into responding, or it creates a social pressure, whatever it creates for you. But that's what it does. I don't like that at all. But what I do like is that Twitter actually, of course, they kind of buried this, but Twitter will let you turn that off to where read receipts aren't a thing for you. And great, fine. Add all the features you want as long as I can turn it off. Now, granted, it'd be better if they made it by default that it was off and you had to turn it on. But understand, just like any other Silicon Valley company, Twitter is primarily concerned with growth. They are not concerned about their present user base. They are concerned about getting new people in. All they need is that constant influx of numbers. We just need more people. Don't even worry about cash flow. We need more people. And talk about cash flow. Supposedly, I think this coming Monday, there's going to be a boardroom meeting, and probably some heads are going to roll, and I mean that in the business sense, not in a literal one, because, supposedly the claim is that they are going to be talking about what's the bidding price for Twitter and who are we going to sell it to. That's happening. Now, I've talked about that before on Sovereign Tech, that was kind of on its way. I would believe there's a good case to be made that Google wants to do it, but people have been saying for the past 2-3 years that Google's going to buy Twitter. It never happened. I think maybe the more interesting place where it would happen would be Microsoft. Amazon might be also, that's sort of the dark horse. Amazon's the dark horse with everything, and Amazon is, of course, eating the world. As we talk about it, it's the Amazon World Domination Tour. They have Twitch, but they don't really have necessarily a social media platform. They have Goodreads, which makes a lot of sense for them as a company, but they don't really have like that really like in your face social media platform, that you just completely recognize. So I could see Twitter getting bought out by Amazon, but I'm betting on Microsoft doing it. That's just a guess. That's not one of my predictions. It's just a guess. So anyway, that's what's happening with Twitter. Transmission, not as the one in the car, but as in the one that you use to download torrents. Like perhaps if you wanted to download an episode of Startup, or every episode of Startup as they come out. Transmission for OS, or for Mac OS, I should say. You're still getting used to saying that. OS 10, Mac OS. Now it's officially Mac OS. Apparently, there's a very, very serious piece of malware, and this is not the first time I think that's happened with transmission, to where malware has gotten through. Well, effectively, the ports, as I understand it, that that transmission allows for, and that torrenting, kind of works with. So, I have said for years on this show on Sovereign Tech, really since the beginning, I think I have said that because it was one of the first questions I ever got asked is what torrent client do I recommend? I recommend QBitTorrent. QBitTorrent. I'll put the link in the show notes. Okay, for episode 192. QBitTorrent. It's open source. It's great. It's on every platform. It's even if you have the F-Droid store on Android, you can even use QBitTorrent on Android. It is top notch. Okay, QBitTorrent is the best, and it does not have this issue that Transmission has. Transmission is a fine, technically, it's the best torrent client on Linux. I think there's a Qt version that they made for Windows as well. I don't even pay attention to that, but on Linux, it's great, and it comes with pretty much every Linux distro you could download. Okay, and it's fine to use it there because, the security exploit that was taken advantage of with macOS is not a part of Linux. But if you're using, macOS, well, this is a problem. So again, as I have always recommended, even for Linux, even on Linux, I put QBitTorrent on my Linux machines. Okay, use QBitTorrent. It is the best. Deluge is a good one too, but those are really the two. That's as far as I would go. QBitTorrent, again, top notch. Let's see what else we got here. I have so many stories I want to get through. I don't want to spend much time talking about this. Brave integrating micropayments, integrating Bitcoin. The Brave browser is the browser that is, designed from the bottom up to block ads and really just try and secure the internet. That's really what it's about. It doesn't really want to block. I mean, yes, it really wants to block ads, but that's not the purpose, behind it. The purpose is about creating a secure browsing environment and differentiating itself, which it allows to do. And it's funny because everybody gets hot and bothered about Brave. Brave's not the only major web browser that blocks ads natively. Opera does. You have to turn it on, but they give you, when you first install Opera, there is a big fucking flashing sign that says, hey, would you like to block ads? I mean, the instant you install it. So I don't understand, why people get so hot and bothered about Brave. And also, I don't think Brave is going to be long for this world. I think Opera gets away with what they're doing because it's an option. Opera's tried a bunch of different things. Opera has a VPN built into it. Opera, years ago had a BitTorrent client built into it. They've done all kinds of things, but I don't think Opera's in any kind of trouble. Okay, with having ad blocking, because they're owned by it's a Chinese company effectively now. And I mean, what are legislators around the world going to do about China? Nothing. It's kind of like the old saying, there's really only 3 countries in the world. There's the US, China, and Russia. Pretty much China and Russia, and then everything else, which is, under the purview of the US more or less. That's a saying that gets bantied about a bit. Nobody's going to tell a Chinese company what to do in that regard. But Brave, on the other hand, is just an upstart. And I think, granted, it's run by, the guy that got kicked out of Mozilla, he was the CEO of Mozilla, who got kicked out because, he made some very, he made some homosexual comments. So anyway, but Brave, it's already under heat. The pencils are already sharpening to sue the shit out of that company by all of these different advertising firms. I don't think they stand a chance. This is nice that they're talking about doing this whole Bitcoin micropayment thing, but then it matters sort of on the back end is that how do the advertisers, they don't want Bitcoin. Otherwise they'd take it. And no, some little upstart browser is not going to change the world and force advertisers to accept Bitcoin. Stop. Okay, I love Bitcoin. I love it with all my heart. But that's just not going to happen, folks. And we'll talk. I'll prove that a little bit more here later on with some other big companies. Okay, but that's the thing. I get it. I think it's a fine idea to have micropayments built into the browser. I think having ad blocking on the browser, I think is fucking wonderful because they are malicious in so many ways, not just to the security of your computer, but maybe even to the security of your mind. I mean, I am all for ad blocking all the way. Okay. But Brave does not excite me at all because they're either going to have to kowtow at some point to where their ad blocking becomes meaningless, or they're just, they're going to get sued out of existence. That's the reality, folks. Anyway, a couple more stories quick. So just real quick, there was a big, hullabaloo about maybe 2-3 weeks ago that WhatsApp was now going to share your personal data, at the very least your phone number, with Facebook. When Facebook bought WhatsApp a couple of years ago, or a year, however long ago it was, they said, we will keep this separate. We are not going to combine the two. And of course, now Facebook and WhatsApp are lying, or at least Facebook's lying. Not a shock. And like I've said forever, especially about WhatsApp, is that WhatsApp is just an addition. It is a bought addition to the honeypot of data about you that is Facebook, which Facebook, without batting an eye, hands over to every single alphabet soup organization around the world. Woo! And in many ways, that can be proven. I'm making a very broad claim, okay? But come on. I mean, even that WhatsApp case we've brought up many times where WhatsApp was used, supposedly when it has this, it has this great end-to-end encryption, even though that's been proven to be bullshit the way they implemented it, that it's been used to stop terror attacks by WhatsApp sending data about, a terrorist action going down, a terrorist plot, and sending it off, to whatever, it was in Europe, actually. It wasn't even in America. It was in Belgium, I think. And it's a honeypot, folks. And please, I don't support terrorism. I don't support, lethal force, that kind of violence or anything like that. I don't misunderstand me. But let's just be clear about what that means for everybody. Not just the quote-unquote bad guys. So there you go. Facebook lied once again. Next one. Skype. Here's a little Microsoft story. I think this is interesting. Skype Teams. This is going to be theoretically, it's coming. There's already talk of a Skype Teams. As far as what it is, that's up to some degree of conjecture. But Skype Teams appears to be a Slack competitor. Okay. Now, I for some things I have to do, I use Slack, and I think it is just just terrible. It is a terrible, terrible fucking interface. It is a terrible piece of software. It's not even open source. I mean, of course, Skype isn't either, obviously. But it is so bad. Give me an IRC channel any day of the week. Really the reason that Slack gets pushed so hard is because unlike IRC, I think various alphabet soup organizations can more easily categorize and sift through chats being done on Slack. As to where using IRC, nobody knows what's going on. Oh shit. Corporatism doesn't get to, doesn't get its one-click access to everything that all these different teams are saying. But with Slack, they do. Anyway, Skype Teams is coming out using the Skype interface. It's already going to be built into it, to have Slack there. I think it's going to be a huge hit if that's what it is, if it's a Slack competitor. And I think Slack will end up going by the wayside. Because everybody, we talk about it all the time, whether we like it or not, everybody uses Skype. Pretty much everybody has a Skype account. There was a time when Skype was a real hero. I think the way that they stood up against, various regulators and countries and all that and said, no, we will not be a telco. They did it right. And that's why they got so big, because they said, fuck the law. And hell yeah. But, for the past few years, I mean, they got bought out by Microsoft in 2011. And of course, for the past few years, really, they've been, it's effectively spyware. But for what it is, it's something that just, everybody uses. If you're a podcaster, it is effectively required software, unless you want to buy a ton of hardware, that could record no matter what, record what's going on in good fidelity, no matter what, whatever app you use or whatever piece of software you use to do a remote, say, interview with somebody. There's great things, like there's Fiend Phone. That's a phenomenal, little piece of software that's actually far superior to Skype. There's competitors out there, but Skype is the thing right now. Okay. And so anyway, Skype Teams, I think it'll be a hit. It doesn't mean I like it. I still want my IRC channels, but I think it'll be a hit. Speaking of things getting bought out, ARM, as in the processors, that are like in everything, in your phone, in your Raspberry Pi, and all over the place, just got bought out for $31 billion by SoftBank. SoftBank, of course, is the Japanese company, the massive Japanese really conglomerate that also owns Sprint. They bought Sprint, about 2 years ago? And that's where I think the story gets a little interesting, is that now granted, they said they're going to have a very hands-off approach with ARMs. This is SoftBank saying that. Just like, Facebook has a very hands-off approach with WhatsApp, right? Wink, wink. But they say they're going to have a very hands-off approach, but honestly, if you own a telco, one of the largest telcos in the world, which Sprint is, and you own the processor, and the baseband, you own everything that pretty much powers most of the phones on the entire planet, you're not going to take advantage of that? What? Fuck yeah, you are. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying that only makes sense. Yeah. I don't know how this is all going to shape up or look, but pay attention to that. It was kind of funny that a lot of people reporting on that story totally neglected to mention that SoftBank also happens to own a ton of telcos, including Sprint. Anyway, last story while we're on the subject of smartphones, and then we're going to switch things up big time. So I listen, one of my favorite podcasts in the world, Security Now with Steve Gibson and Leo Laporte on the Twit Network. Though if you don't like the Twit Network, you can get Security Now independently. They talked about there's a link to the story and everything, but where now there is an API that's been built for websites, for mobile sites, and not just mobile, of course, but for websites, to be able to access the data coming from the ambient light sensor on your device, on your phone, tablet. I imagine there's already PCs that have ambient light sensors on them. Okay, and this is that little sensor. You can't really see it. It usually it's like just under the bezel at the top, and maybe there's one on the back for you as well, but I don't think it's needed. But anyway, it's not a camera. It's just a little sensor, and it can only see, it can pretty much see the primary colors. And generally, this is used for, like if you have an automatic lighting system, or, where your screen brightness, not lighting, but brightness, an automatic brightness system where your screen changes automatically based upon the amount of light wherever you happen to be. If it's outside, it's very bright. If you go into a dark room, it gets very dim, and it gets used for other things. But now, security researchers have already looked at it and said, well, this can get used to track you. And they proved how, like they showed with just those colors, that while granted it's not enough alone to track you, it does significantly, bring it closer to 100% identification of who and what it is, with said device, who's holding that phone, whose phone is it, blah, blah, blah. It just adds on. So many of these fucking, web APIs, holy shit. And then you think about, was it Google what was that API? They just spent billions on some API company. I mean, there is so much power in this stuff. And I worry a little bit too, because like even your e-readers, which generally I like to think of as, well, not the Amazon ones so much, but some others, they're largely secure devices. I mean, fuck, they have ambient light sensors on them, even, to help with that, again, that whole automatic brightness thing. I forget what Steve Gibson called it on Security Now, but he came up with another acronym that effectively meant this is another way to track you. It was like Tifidowa or something like that, some crazy acronym, but it was right on. But the ambient light sensor. Now, I want to shift gears. Okay, let's get away from the random access. I had somebody ask me through Patreon, and of course, if you want to be a Patreon subscriber, I would be honored if you were. There's hours and hours, just in over a month and a half, there's over 30 hours of extra content, extra Sovryn Tech Q&A episodes, specials, Sovryn Top 8s, all kinds of stuff available there. Okay, and it's at least $1 a month. I'm doing the pay what you want model, but you can give more than $1 a month, and many have, and many people have upgraded after just putting in $1, and then they're like, holy shit, look at all the stuff we're getting, and they went with it, and I'm honored by that. I'm so honored that these people are on board with the show. So anyway, I talked about it. Somebody asked me through Patreon, because then you have access to the Patreon Messenger, and you can message me directly through that, which I always respond to those like as instantaneously as I can. I get back to people on that. Through that messenger, somebody asked me a question for a Patreon Q&A episode, and they asked me about Monero and how it relates to Dash and all this. And so in this past week's, I believe it was episode 4, subscriber content episode 14, in the past week's Q&A, which came out Wednesday, I did a full breakdown, largely of the history of Monero and the history of Dash. Okay, so I talked about it there. I'm going to talk about it briefly here, but if you want to hear the rest of what I have to say about it, because there's a lot to cover on it, you can, if you want to join Patreon, please do. Patreon.com/SovrynTech, and you can get the hookup. Okay? But the question was more or less because obviously Monero has had this huge rise in popularity recently, and it's gone up like 10x in price, if not more. I mean, like really, it's capping, baby. And people asked, what do you think of Monero and all this? And I think a lot of people didn't realize, I'm not saying the person that asked the question, or I'm not saying about some longtime Sovryn Tech listeners, because longtime Sovryn Tech listeners know that I talked about Monero back when it first came out, which was in April 2014, and I talked about what happened in September of 2014. So Monero's not new. It's been around for, over 2 years, almost 3. It's not a new kid on the block. I don't think people realize that. And even that, before it was Monero actually was a rebranding of Bytecoin. Okay, now what it is based on what's called CryptoNote. Okay, and CryptoNote is... So Monero, the reason why Monero is so popular right now, let's get into that real quick first. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. You can listen to the Patreon episode if you want to hear the rest. But... it became popular because it was AlphaBay. I think the name of it was AlphaBay. It was one of the markets on the deep, dark web, on Tor, that a lot of customers for AlphaBay said that they wanted, to exchange goods. They wanted AlphaBay to start accepting Monero, because Monero with CryptoNote, actually it's technically CryptoNote 2 now, because there was a hack on September of 2014 with CryptoNote 1. Okay, it was a Merkle tree attack. Again, I explain what all that is in the Patreon episode. It allows for that opaqueness. Okay, it allows for, it's not as bad as it's not as bad. It is an attempt at being genuinely anonymous, much like Zcash. Which, boy, is there exciting shit to say about Zcash? The amazing Pixel, Sovryn Tech's own Pixel, Paige Peterson, is now working with Zcash. Boy, if that doesn't say enough about how excited I am about that project. And of course, I've been talking about Zcash, which was originally called ZeroCoin. I've been talking about that since the paper first came out in 2013. That's why I get excited about it, because it's such a great idea back then, and it's, kind of been working, off and on here and there. Now finally it's going to get its big release in October. Very exciting. Very excited about Zcash. Have been for years on this show. And we've been covering it and talking about its developments and everything for that long. And it's always been a little skeptical. How come because originally, remember, it was Zcash, not Monero, but was Zcash or was Zero Coin, which it was called at the time. The idea was originally that it was supposed to get implemented into Bitcoin. And the core devs of Bitcoin wouldn't have it. And I was always a little concerned about that. Okay, because as many people in the space have said, myself included, for years and years and years, the one thing that could unseat Bitcoin would be a cryptocurrency that was more anonymous. That is the one feature that I think, could make something bigger than Bitcoin. That doesn't mean Bitcoin's going to go anywhere, but that something could become more valuable. Monero fits into that category of something that I'm not saying it's going to. In fact, I don't think it's going to be more valuable than Bitcoin, or that it's going to unseat it. All right, but Monero is definitely appealing to a certain audience, to an audience that wants its anonymity, just like the customers of Alphabet and other various stores, that are on tour. So yes, there was a point where Monero had a real problem, because a great Sovryn Tech listener actually asked me about Monero years ago, and what did I think about it and all that. And I said, well, it looks like the development team, the dev team was, kind of on rocky shores. I'm not feeling super confident. And then in September, there was, effectively theoretical Merkle tree attack that, showed there could have been counterfeiting. Now, that has to do with the Merkle tree. You have to understand what that is. And it's effectively a system of quickly verifying hashes, through nodes. Okay. I went into much more depth in the Q&A episode. All right. But the potential for counterfeiting was there. And then, once you can counterfeit a currency, well, then kind of what good is it? I mean, yeah, sure, the US dollar gets counterfeited, but then at the beginning of the day, what good is the US dollar? It's just something backed by nuclear weapons. It really doesn't have any actual value or any worth. So anyway, all of that out of the way, Monero has really skyrocketed as late. As far as its ability to deliver on the anonymity, well, it certainly does do a better job than Bitcoin. Some people will say that anonymity can be added into Bitcoin and will be added in with various side chains and all that. Okay, when that comes out, I'm sure people will be excited about it and they will make use of it, and and they'll rock and roll with it. But for right now, Monero is out there. And I think that's fine. My opinion on Monero, that was effectively the question, is that, yeah, that can exist. As I've said for years. I know I keep saying for years, but it's because I don't, I listen to a lot of these other Bitcoin space shows and cryptography shows and all, and they don't talk about this stuff. So that's why I say for years, because I want you to know that when you listen to Sovryn Tech, you're getting the information months, if not years, ahead of all of these people that claim to be experts on the matter. But the point I've been making for years is that I think in a freer market, or in an actual freed market, you will end up with thousands of currencies. You will not end up with one. I know some people like to say, well, if you take Austrian economics to its logical conclusion, you will end up with, a singular currency. I absolutely do not agree with that. Because there is historical precedent for when government was less involved in money, you had a lot more monetary tools, available to you. Okay, a lot more systems of value. So, Monero, I think, can sit right alongside Bitcoin. No problem whatsoever. Now, as far as Dash, in comparison to Dash, the point I'll make quickly here is that I've talked about Dash actually a little more than I've talked about Monero, but I talked about it also back when it was called Darkcoin. You see how these things keep changing names? Because there's the reason they change names is because there was an issue with, say, the previous name, and so they want it to be, something else, or maybe they grew to a certain point and they want something that's a little more catchy, that rolls off the tongue a little bit better. Darkcoin, I guess I could see where there'd be a marketing problem and they want to change it to Dash. But Dash there's some other, I think there's some messaging features, there's some other features available inside of that. I don't really have a problem with Dash. I'm not saying go invest in it. I'm not saying go invest in Monero. I'm not saying to go do any of that. I'm just saying those kinds of things, I don't really have a problem with how with the fact that they exist. It's not like Ethereum, where I think it's a fucking terrible idea and nobody asked for it. Yes, people are asking for more anonymous ways to store and exchange value. Lots of people are asking for that. So please, Dash, Monero, Zcash, side chains on Bitcoin, whatever, do them all. And they can all coexist. And hopefully they will coexist. I am all on board with that. Okay? I'm not telling you what to go looking at. What to invest in. But as far as my opinion, no, I don't really have much of a problem with them. I mean, I stopped looking at Darkcoin/Dash years ago because they had on their website, I've talked about this before, on their website, they had a series of like goals that they made, for the currency, to where they were going to be GPU resistant, I think, and a bunch of other ones. And like they kept, and I mean, credit to them for being transparent. They didn't just erase the lines. They would just cross out the lines of the things that it stopped being. Okay, okay, no, we failed on this goal. We failed on this goal. But it was failing on its goals when it first started out. And I was like, all right, forget it. I'm just, it's not doing anything for me. So I didn't pay attention to Dash. That doesn't mean that I don't think it can't exist. I mean, there's things that I really don't want out there in the world, like Ethereum, but whatever, Dash, Monero, I think that's fine. Well, anyway, if you want to, like I said, listen to that Patreon episode. I went into far more depth over what the differences are between Monero and Bitcoin, like how Monero is memory intensive instead of CPU intensive, all this different stuff. So please do check that out, and I'd be honored, that you're donating to the show. It means a lot to me. Anyway, speaking of something, while we're on the subject of blockchain technology here, here's the bullshit. Okay, and believe me, we're going to get into Apple because all of the all of the segues, I still say that all the time because that's how you read it. Never make fun of somebody, honestly. Don't make fun of somebody the way they pronounce something, because if they know the word, you know what that means? That means they read it somewhere, and they probably read it a lot. They just never heard it out loud, and you should never insult somebody for reading. Seriously, that's something that kind of gets my goat a bit. But anyway, it is funny that because I say Siegs all the time and I know better now. Sometimes I'll do it, as a jest in and of itself. But anyway, so this will all segue into Apple. So bear with me, okay? But there's another little, we mentioned Ethereum just now. Well, there's a new kid on the block, on the blockchain, perhaps, but not really. And this is where the problems actually begin. But I want to talk about it a little bit because it is going to be having a fundraiser. Woohoo! Another fundraiser! Oh, I've just been dying for another fundraiser. My money's got to go somewhere. Anyway, come September 19th, 8 days away. This is being recorded, it's a little over 8 days, which is being recorded on September 10th. Synereo will be coming out, and their currency, their in-game currency, which is what you might as well call it, because if the technology itself is not the currency, is it all just a game? But anyway, Synereo, it's called AMP. Okay, now I'll tell you something, and I'll explain more what Synereo is. But I'll say this, I'm not giving you financial advice. I am not a finance advisor. I have, no legal standing to be able to tell you to do this sort of thing, so please do not blame me. But I will say that I could imagine a scenario, where if somebody bought into this AMP, and, when they do their fundraiser, and then they perhaps, if they allow it to, kind of like Steam It, the bullshit that is Steam It, where, you can sell off half of what you have, but otherwise you're going to have to wait 2 years to sell off the other half. So depending on whether or not Synereo, and I don't have any details on this, allows you to sell off what you have, you could probably do a pretty good pump and dump, and you could probably make a pretty hefty quick buck if you sold off your AMP, a couple months later on after Synereo is released, or maybe even after, the whole fundraising event is over, because AMP will be stored. It's kind of like MadeSafe coins, where they are being stored on Omni, right? Which used to be Mastercoin. So anyway, there's a play that could probably happen there, but understand, I think you're supporting an idea, a system, a technology that is just absolutely full of shit. Spoiling the lead here, okay, with Synereo. What Synereo is, it's a few things. So it's initially advertising itself as a competitor to Steam It. It's advertising itself as a social media platform. But then when you continue to read on, and I put 2 links in the show notes where you can read, I believe there's a Bitcoin Magazine article that talks about it, where they talk with the devs, and then there's also their main website in the show notes for episode 192. Now, I'll start off with that as well, is that some of the devs involved in this, in Synereo, are directly from the Ethereum team, and I think that's going to lead to kind of the answer on this whole thing. But they are starting off calling themselves a social media platform. But as you read on, they say, actually, we're so much more. Social media is just one aspect of what we're doing. We are an entire platform. So when you get to the end of everything they talk about with Synereo, it's just another Ethereum. And in fact, it's working very closely with Ethereum, like I said. Now, they do some interesting, they make some interesting claims, like, well, we're not really a blockchain, we're actually an R-chain, which I don't know what the fuck R-chain means. But this is, as soon as I read that, when I was reading about Synereo, and it's Synereo, if you're going to go look it up right now. When I was first reading about it and they said, we're not a blockchain, we're an R-chain, that instantly raised red flags for me. Maybe that's what the R stands for, is red flags. Because now you're doing bullshit marketing tactics. And I get annoyed with bullshit marketing tactics because really what you're producing, what you're putting out there into the world, if it's really good, if it's something that's going to stand the test of time, if it's something that is really worth investing in for the long haul, it should sell itself. It should. But instead, they're going with these, really very shady tactics, in my opinion, of like saying, well, we're not really a blockchain. We're blockchain 2.0. We're blockchain 3.0. Whew. Which, I've used that term before to describe some things where something is beyond a blockchain, like MadeSafe. MadeSafe is beyond the idea of a blockchain. Okay. And there's other ideas that are really beyond the idea of a blockchain, even though that, they follow a peer-to-peer framework. But Synereo is not MadeSafe. Synereo is, like I said, it's really an Ethereum mock-up in many ways. And again, it's working directly with the developers. And that leads to really my initial problem here, or my initial problem is the marketing. My second problem is this. Now, I told you how there's Ethereum developers involved in all of this and how really, in many ways, it's a mimic of Ethereum. I'll explain the differences in a minute. But I think that considering what's happening between Ethereum proper and Ethereum Classic, I think you are looking at the downfall of Ethereum in general. Now, of course, I've been predicting that for years because it's just a terrible idea for a multitude of reasons, which I've talked over many, many episodes. I'm not going to necessarily reiterate them here. Okay, but I think that Synereo is an offload point. It is a jumping off point. It's a safe landing for all of those Ethereum developers, all of those Ethereum projects, and perhaps even all of those Ethereum investors of some kind. That's how tight-knit this is. I think this is going to be effectively not blockchain 2.0, it's going to be Ethereum 2.0, and it's going to fall prey to all of the same problems. And in fact, it's going to be much worse. Now, the developers for Synereo are saying, look, if the DAO situation, the DAO hack, it really wasn't a hack, it was just using the DAO as the rules allowed for. Okay, but if the DAO hack, for just for shorthand, occurred on Synereo, it couldn't have occurred on Synereo. They would have been able to solve it instantaneously. Now they're being they're not being very clear on how their whole tech stack works to where they're to where they can allow this all to bolster their claims. They're not being very clear on all that. Because as I understand, and the reason they say that the R-chain is not a blockchain actually, again, bullshit marketing, is because the R-chain prunes itself over time. This is my understanding based upon, what they have claimed and what the stories have been, read about, is that it kind of prunes itself over time. Okay. Now here's the issue with that. So, your blockchain size is never going to get very big. And it effectively is, well, we mentioned the Merkle tree. Okay. The Merkle tree attack earlier, how that would allow for counterfeiting based upon the fact that if you could trick, just some hashes on certain nodes within the network, nodes, computers, whatever. Okay. If you could trick that, then you could do double spends, you could do counterfeiting of an action on the blockchain itself, or in the case of Synereo, it would be the R-chain. Oh, that's going to get annoying fast, having to say that. And so if the blockchain, the R-chain, is constantly pruning itself, that means that there's a certain point where it is just relying upon where its sense of history, the R-chain's sense of history is based upon, some kind of grand hash at the end that just keeps kind of refreshing itself, saying that everything's okay. Now here's the problem is that, what if you could just dupe that last hash? You could, there's just a huge exploit waiting to happen. Now maybe they have some kind of miracle work that I don't get. That will explain, how they're able to secure this and how they're able to make all this work. But I don't think it's going to work. And again, it's going to be a smart contract platform. It's going to do everything that Ethereum wants to do. And so it's bullshit for those reasons alone. Because again, who the fuck asked for this stuff? And even Synereo, even as a social media platform. Are you going to be able to do live video on that? I haven't heard anybody ask that question, and I haven't heard anybody even even mention it. Today, in the past year, ever since Meerkat came out and died already, okay? But ever since then, if you don't talk about live video on your social media platform, fucking forget it. You are not going to get that growth. And what were we talking about earlier with Twitter? Every Silicon Valley company, every tech company has one concern alone. It is not even cash flow. You worry about cash flow 15 years from now if you're still alive or you didn't get bought out or acqui-hired, okay? You need growth. You are not going to get people on board with your system when whoever, Facebook or whoever has Facebook Live or Google has YouTube or all of this, if you're not going to, you cannot rely upon Google as a backend. And honestly, if you are relying on YouTube videos to be displayed upon whatever your platform is, just suck it up and realize that the real social media platform isn't Steemit, it's not Synereo, it's not Ethereum, it's YouTube. You're just a stupid front end. You're an extra step that you're trying to sell to people. You're like America Online in the 90s when people really just needed the internet. Get America Online out of the way. No, this is a dumb idea. Now, while we're talking about dumb ideas, so let me break this down, and we're going to go full circle back to blockchain here in a few minutes. Let me break this down. Monero, fine. I had no problem with that. No real issues. Okay, there was a hack. Okay. 2 years ago. Dash, whatever, fine, it can exist for what it is, I don't care. Ethereum, no. Synereo, no. Bitcoin, absolutely, yes, okay? So there you go, there's the tail of the tape for all the different blockchain technologies that we brought up here. And, well, hell, I mentioned Steemit as well. Let me make sure this gets made real clear one more time after all the times we've talked about on this show. Steemit, do you invest? Do we use it? Do we get on board with it? No. Bad idea. Not very well implemented. Not full featured. But in the realm of bad ideas this week, did we hear about some bad ideas? I mean, bad fucking ideas. And you know what it took to deliver these bad ideas? Do you know what it took to bring one of the worst ideas in the past 100 years, and I mean that time frame literally? Do you know what it took to bring it into fruition, to bring it into the world, and to sell it to the masses? It took courage. Courage. That's what Apple said this week at their little event, just earlier this week. Oh, it was, and I am so glad. I'm going to read a story to you. Okay, because what happened this week is the iPhone 7 came out, and the iPhone 7 did what we had said it was going to do on this show many months ago. We said, based upon a lot of the reports coming out, we had said that, yes, Apple is the company that would have the courage to get rid of the headphone jack. 100-year-old technology, I mean, based upon various improvements, 50, 60, but let's just be broad here. And they got rid of it. They took it out. And it took courage. The other things of the iPhone 7, okay, better processor, dual cameras, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, some of that stuff is really interesting. Okay, I'm not a photographer. I don't give a shit. But, I understand why some people do. Great. I'm glad you like that camera, the dual camera and all that stuff. A lot of the other crap with it, great. I'm glad you're on board with it. Okay, that's all for you. I'm going to break this down. Before I read the story, I'm going to break this whole argument down because the internet went nuts. First off, like I said, I was very happy to find out that they thought Apple's presentation was absolutely ridiculous. It was so pretentious. It was, it was assholes on stage. Like when Phil Schiller said that it took courage. I mean, there was just a collective eye roll around the world. Like, oh, come on, Apple. It's not courage. And we'll get into why, that is. But I was glad that happened. And there's been a lot of other very, very funny, a lot of great memes. There's the one about the Millennium Falcon that says, this ship can travel into hyperspace and all this stuff. Still has a headphone jack, and it shows, Han Solo with a little, headset that's wired and everything. There's some great ones out there. Okay, and I made a couple myself. I made one where it was, because you don't just get the, since there isn't a headphone jack, how do you listen to things on the iPhone 7? Well, you get what's called AirPods, which are these little like earphones like you're used to, just they don't have wires, and they kind of have a little bar sort of hanging down that does the Bluetooth transmission. Okay, we'll talk about the reality, why that's even there, why all this happened and all that in a minute. But so I made a couple memes. One of them was I took the shot of Ben Stiller from There's Something About Mary, where he has the cum hanging down his ear, and I just had to type out where it said, "Oh, that's just my AirPods." And then the other one I did was a shot of Phil the Shill, showing off the headphone jackless iPhone 7, but then showing how the iPhone 7 will come with a free adapter that will connect to the Lightning port and will give you, and this is a $9 value. I love when they use that word value, as if they want to give you value. If they wanted to give you value, they'd still have the headphone jack in the fucking phone. But they give you this $9 value, and they show it up on the big screen. And so I had a picture of that, of the adapter going into it, and Phil the Shill talking about it, and I just put under it, I said, cowardice. Because if you're courageous for getting rid of the headphone jack, then when you put in the box an adapter, you're a coward. Because cowardice is the opposite of courageous. You did a cowardly act by putting that adapter in there, because you really aren't that courageous to let that be. I mean, now there's problems with that adapter in and of itself, okay, beyond the cowardice, and that's based upon Phil the Shill's paradigm, okay. There's problems alone because you can't charge your phone with the Lightning jack, obviously, or with the Lightning port. You can't charge it and have your classic, 1/8 jack, 3.5 millimeter jack headphones in at the same time. Huge issue. Okay. Now I know a lot of people, and again, I do want to get to the story. I know a lot of people were saying, they said that, well, this is finally Apple innovating. This is them moving forward. This is blah, 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 blah. No, it's not. And in fact, actually, they are shooting themselves in the foot in many ways, to use a colloquialism. And the reason I say that is because it's not really innovation when much of what they wanted to do, when based upon what they were talking about, you have to understand that when they advertised about it, they were really just talking about the audio. They were not talking about anything else. And so it's really not an innovation when you create a very complex system like using, Bluetooth or even the Lightning port to transmit audio, when there are much simpler, more efficient implementations for, to be able to transmit audio. But this isn't about audio. So that's part one against it not being innovative. But the other problem is that the one way that you could actually use that adapter and charge the phone at the same time, Apple killed that technology. Well, they didn't kill it, but they certainly kept it from getting, any kind of mainstream adoption. And that technology is inductive charging. A lot of phones have had this, even Google phones, Nexus phones, like the Nexus 4 and some others have had it, where you could just put it down on this little platform and it would just charge. You didn't have to plug it in at all. But the problem is you can't do that with a metal phone. You can't do that with an aluminum phone. You have to use a plastic phone. Otherwise, the inductive charging, you're going to be touching a giant shocker. Yeah, you're touching a hot wire if you put an aluminum phone in an inductive charger. It's not going to work at all. Okay, so they actually killed the genuine solution to this, by going all fucking premium on everything. You know what I mean? Now, I want to be clear here, okay? Something else somebody might bring up is that, well, the iPhone 7 is water resistant, very water resistant, not necessarily waterproof. Now, and that's because, we don't have the headphone jack. Well, that's bullshit, because I know personally, as I've owned the phones in the past, but Sony, Kyocera, Samsung, there's a laundry list of devices that have ports that do not, they have audio jack ports. Headphone jack ports, or headphone jacks, not headphone jack ports, I'm being redundant, but they have headphone jacks that are waterproof without even a rubber cover on them at all. So no, that's not necessary for Apple to be able to, to make the phone water resistant or waterproof. Now, I want to be a little understanding and respectful. Look, Apple does make super high quality devices, computers, laptop. I mean, the whole thing. They really, really do. Their phones, I mean, the iPod, I've been a fan of the iPod, as long as there's been an iPod. Okay. They really, really do. So if you're in that ecosystem, if you love that quality, if you love that look, I get it. Go ahead and buy it. That, get into it. That's fine. I just think that there's a concern. I'm not going to tell you that what Apple's doing is somehow like unethical or wrong. They're a business. They have ultimate control of the iPhone, and that's really what I think this is all about. But they can do what they want. Go for it. If they want to get rid of ports, get rid of all the ports. Get rid of the fucking screen. Get rid of the home button, which they also did that. Well, at least it's not a hardware button anymore. Fine. Yes, they can do that. And if you like that, go ahead. Okay, I am just informing things from my perspective of what I want. And I am all about choice. Apple would seem to be the opposite. Now, I want to read this story, and then I've got another story. I said we're going to get around to blockchains again. We're going to. Okay, in just a second. But I want to get through this story from TechCrunch. This is from September 7th, 2016, by Devin Coldway. And it's the same... It was on the same day that this whole event happened, and it is titled so aptly, Courage. Phil Schiller today caused the largest collective eye roll in the history of the world with his explanation of why Apple was leaving the 3.5 millimeter analog audio jack behind. Quote, it comes to one word, courage. Well, first of all, come on. Apple was never known for its extreme humility, but presenters usually stop short of blatant self-aggrandizement. Well, maybe not Johnny Ive, but the others tend to temper their boasts with a sort of wonder. Twitter was afire with mirth, and there's some very funny tweets in the story. Link in the show notes, episode 192 of Sovryn Tech. Reading on. Second, if it's courageous to remove the headphone port, what is it when you include the ability to restore it in the box? I mean, judged by their own standards, that must be abject cowardice, right? In Stallion breaking in, that was my point. You're not really moving things forward. Reading on, but it isn't courage. And Apple has behaved courageously before, at least within the limitations of how courageous a global corporation can be. I think it was courage and self-interest that made it fight the FBI the way it has. It was courageous to come out in favor of marriage equality and other civil rights issues. Well, We've talked about all that on Sovryn Tech before, whatever. Removing the headphone jack from the iPhone is not an act of courage. It's an act of leverage. Now, I want to stop right here in the story, and I have a comment I want to make. Because the instant thing that people say to me, and I understand where they're coming from, is they talk about, and there's been rebuttal arguments about this, okay? Back when it was even first getting when it was rumored that they would get rid of Apple would get rid of the headphone jack in the iPhone 7. Okay, some people will talk about how Apple killed the DVD drive or the CD-ROM drive, how Apple killed, all the various different, printer ports, all the command port 3, all the classic stuff, the serial ports, all that. And they made it completely USB, back in the USB 1 days. All of this is true. Okay. They did do that. But here's the thing. Unlike with the iPhone, based upon the reasons they said they did it, which is largely has to do with audio. Okay. Again, I think there's more to it than just audio. It has to do with data going back and forth to your ears and from your ears and, maybe even health data. But I think, when they got rid of, say, the serial ports and the parallel ports and all that, when they sold the iMac back in 98, I was one of the original guys that bought an iMac in 98. I love that thing. I talk about it all the time because it still works to this day. Since 1998, and the thing still functions, 64 mega RAM. Okay? The reason that did well was not because they were courageous in getting rid of serial ports and the parallel port. In fact, I think it still had the parallel port, if I remember right. But in that it dived so deep into into going on USB. It didn't come with a floppy drive, right? It did still have a CD-ROM drive, but it didn't have a floppy drive. You had to buy one extra, which I did. But anyway, people say, well, that was courageous. No. The reason, and that it was a success, it was courageous and a success. No, the reason the iMac was successful was because it was like a $1,300 computer at a time when computers cost $3,000. That's why it was successful, and it was a good one. It was a really good computer. It had nothing to do with getting rid of the floppy drive. It had nothing to do with USB. USB didn't take off until USB 2.0 hit its stride, and then there was like decent data transfer rates. Stop that narrative. You guys, you're so off. As far as with the DVD drive, well, they created something of better value. It's not that, well, people don't want DVDs anymore. That's not true. It's not that they don't want discs anymore. It's that to create the iPad or to create the MacBook Air, to make something that could fit in a manila envelope like the original MacBook Air did, they had to get rid of that drive. It's not that people didn't want DVDs anymore. In fact, at the time, DVD was at its height of, piracy and all that, where people are copying them and everything, okay? It's that there was a sufficient trade-off. I don't think there's a sufficient trade-off, certainly not based upon what they told you at the Apple event this past week, for why you're losing the headphone jack. It is not because of the waterproofing, okay? It is not about digital audio. Oh, it is not about digital audio. That is bullshit, okay? Let me read on with the story here. The avalanche, quote, the avalanche of gobbledygook Schiller unloaded onto the audience while attempting to justify replacing a 50-year-old standard port with a proprietary interface was meaningless. The Lightning port is totally unsuited to sending and receiving audio. Audio is so simple to transmit in high fidelity that it can be done with a wire hanger. Using a powered high-bandwidth data interface adds nothing but cost and complexity, and the space you save is minimal. Data doesn't need to go to the headphones, nor do the headphones need to send data back. Digital to analog conversion has to be done eventually because speakers don't produce sound waves with ones and zeros. Whether you do it a millimeter from the speaker or 3 feet away in the phone itself is not important. It won't affect the sound quality. The 3.5 millimeter jack is robust, familiar, secure, well documented, and so on. We've seen the argument play out over the last year. You know why it's good, because it works reliably worldwide and with millions of devices without Apple's permission. See, it's that last part that must bother them. The idea that someone, somewhere, is doing something with an iPhone that they haven't anticipated, like making a thermometer or payment system or 3D scanner. Someone who hasn't paid for a license to attach that thing to their phone. Apple is taking the first step to make sure that never happens. They're able to do this because no one can do anything about it. They're in a position of immense power, and they're using that power to eliminate something good and replace it with something that makes them money. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a business plan. Now, that conspiracy theory, that's the end of the article. That conspiracy theory comment is spot on, because what did Apple say? Apple said all those people complaining about, when we talked about this on Sovryn Tech months ago, and we said they were going to do it, the first concern was that it would allow for Apple to have like this really tyrannical DRM, but I repeat myself, okay, that would keep you from doing what you wanted to, hardware or software-wise, data or hardware-wise, okay, with a device. Apple came out that day of the event and said anybody claiming that we're going to pull any DRM stuff is a conspiracy theorist. Now, believe me, there are a lot of conspiracy nutters out there. There are a lot of people who buy into some conspiracies that are just fucking unbelievable. The amount of times I've been called a lizard Jew in my life, I can't take it. Jew. Damn it. But understand that if you're a critical thinker, the word conspiracy or the term conspiracy theorist gets used to shut up the opposition, to shut down conversation. That's the point of that. And Apple, what a dick move on their part to call people that, because that instantly shuts down the conversation in the common person's mind. They use that term on purpose, and they're wrong for saying it. This is the thing, okay? This is the deal here with what's really going on, is that they plan on doing so much more. You know, we saw at IFA or at IFA. We saw at IFA this past year, there was the Xperia Ear, which is this little earpiece that connects via Bluetooth to your phone from Sony, thus Xperia. And this is going to be some kind of new interface. This is obviously the direction that they are going, is that they are working towards more of an earpiece. Perhaps that will connect to an Apple Watch. There's a new Apple Watch announced too. I will be talking about that during Game Talk this episode, okay? So don't worry, that's coming as well. But this is all about Apple having complete tyrannical control of its platform. They hate, this article said it beautifully, they hate the fact that someone might come up with something that could be used in an open port that they didn't have to pay a license fee to be able to use the lightning, the lightning jack, lightning port, and have the proper connector and everything, and come up with something that they didn't think of and that they don't get to take a cut out of. because, the company could just release the app for free and then, well, yeah, they get the $99, developer fee every year, right? But otherwise, they don't get much out of what could become a gigantic booming business. You think of things like there's like those breathalyzers that you can connect to them. I mean, all these different technologies are like the Square, the company Square or the company Stripe that sells, the little card reader that goes into the headphone jack and all that. Folks, the headphone jack can do amazing things. I mean, absolutely amazing things. You could waterproof them. You could charge a device through a headphone jack. There's an MP3 player that allows you to connect through USB through the audio, or to charge anyway, through that. I mean, there's so much that can be done with that. It's a beautiful open standard that everybody can develop and come up with all kind of incredible new ideas, and Apple does not want that. Yes, they are anti-consumer and they are anti-development. I consider that a fact. You want to argue against that with me? Let's see how things shape up. Let's see how many new technologies come out of somebody's garage. You watch the show like Shark Tank. Okay, where, all these entrepreneurs kind of come up, and they have these great ideas and everything, and it works with the iPhone and all that. A lot of these, really scrappy little companies, they are going to die unless they can pay up whatever it takes, to be able to have access and get through. It's not just DRM for music, folks. I think that's where people get lost in the DRM conversation. It's not just about DRM for the music. It's DRM for everything on the device. DRM for hardware, DRM for all of it. And they screwed all of it. And to prove that Apple's tyrannical, let's get on to the next story that I've got here. And this one comes from Cointelegraph. You can read the whole thing. I'm not going to get into reading it, but you can read the whole thing. The link is in the show notes, episode 192. And this has to do with the JAXX wallet, which is a very popular blockchain wallet founded by Anthony Diorio, who's been a guest on this show in the past, and who I consider to be largely a very nice guy. And he had gotten, or his team anyway, had gotten a notice from Apple saying that there was a problem with the JAXX wallet. So what's this problem? Well, understand, the JAXX wallet is a multi-currency wallet. Okay, I think it accepts Ethereum, it accepts DAO. I think now it can accept Ethereum Classic as well, which I find very interesting because, there's some very close ties with Ethereum. And it accepts Bitcoin, and it accepts Dash. Supposedly it might even accept Monero soon. There's some talk of that. However, Apple had a little problem with the fact that now they're accepting Dash. Why would this be? What could possibly be the problem? I mean, what's the difference between one currency and another? What the fuck? And, Anthony Diorio in this story from Cointelegraph said, it just doesn't make any sense. Well, as I've theorized on Sovryn Tech many times, I think Apple is looking to become a bank. They are looking to look very legit as a money transmitter and as a money handler. And when you start accepting currencies like Dash that are designed for a degree of anonymity, I can only guess that they're going to have such problems if they ever try to implement Monero or Zcash. We'll see. They don't like it. Now, in all fairness, any other platform, I think JAXX is available on like seven different platforms. Any other platform, no problem. You can accept Dash with it all you want, but they had to remove that functionality from iOS. Unfucking believable. The history of Apple and blockchains is an ugly one. Apple does not like it. Now, I kind of wonder if the JAXX team would be interested in pulling a trick. I'm reminded of the Fivo wallet from years ago, where they figured out through Apple's enterprise agreements, through their enterprise terms of service, that there is a way that if you make something enterprise software by attaching it, what Fivo did is they attached it to a co-op that they ran. And they attached the software to that, so it became enterprise software. Then they could, at the time, when Apple wouldn't allow for Bitcoin wallets, they were the only Bitcoin wallet on iOS because they used this little legal loophole. I don't know if JAXX is going to try to do that. I imagine Apple has probably closed up that legal loophole. But, I mean, you want to talk about anti-consumer. This company is as fucking anti-user and anti-consumer as it gets. But it gets worse. Because not only are users likely not happy, a lot of people were very, very pissed off about getting rid of the headphone jack. Not only are people mad about that, or, not only are those people mad about it, but now it looks like Wall Street is getting in on the whole thing. Okay, because I've got a story here, and in fact, I really want to thank a Sovereign Tech listener for sending me this. This is from the Financial Times. They sent it to me through Patreon, because Patreon, once you're a Patreon subscriber for Sovereign Tech, there is an entire social media platform, speaking of social media platforms, that you can take advantage of and you can connect with me, but it's only to patrons. Okay. And so he sent me, I thought this was great. I never even thought about it, but he sent me an entire story from the Financial Times, which has a paywall with it, and sent it to me. And here is, I mean, this is beautiful. Okay, this is the story. It's Apple iPhone fatigue. After investing in Apple in 2013, Carl Icahn suggested that the company would produce a television, even venturing an estimate for annual revenues $40 billion. 3 years on, the veteran activist has been disappointed. There is still only one Apple product to reach that level of sales. Early reviews of the latest iPhone suggest that Apple has added enough features to keep consumers interested. Its prospects are aided by exploding phones at Samsung. Yet for investors, here we go. Yet for investors, and this is what a public company ultimately has to answer to, apathy has set in. The share price appears stuck at about $100. The stock surpassed that level for the first time back in September 2012 with the launch of the iPhone 5. It was back at about $100 for another iPhone launch in September 2014, in September 2015, and September this year. For its valuation, Apple falls between old war horses, Hewlett-Packard, and Juniper Networks, with an enterprise value of less than 6 times earning before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. Okay, Apple trades, here's the cincher. Apple trades like an ex-growth company because it is one. You've got a problem when you become ex-growth. You've got a problem when you're not bringing in, we've been talking about this all episode, when you're not bringing in new users, you've got an issue. And tell me about this. Like, this is the simple question, okay? We got the whole situation with Dash. So you're probably not going to get Dash people involved, because there's probably not going to be able to Dash wallet at all. Okay? But let's talk about that headphone jack again for a second. Because ask somebody just this simple question. Regardless of the operating system, regardless of the look of the phone, regardless of the build quality, regardless of all of that, if somebody asked you, do you want a headphone, or do you want a phone with a headphone jack or without? How many people are going to say with? I guarantee you everybody's going to say with. I pretty much guarantee it, because there's no argument to have. This falls under the same thing, just like with Ethereum, Synereo, and all this different stuff we were talking about. Nobody's asking for this shit. Nobody asked to get rid of the headphone jack. Nobody wanted it to go away. So why do it? Nobody's asking for thinner phones either. Everybody, you know what everybody's asking for? You want to talk about the fact that these companies are so, high on their goddamn horses and they don't give a shit about consumers anymore. Okay, you want proof of that? How many people want more battery life, much more battery life? Nobody's asking for it to be thinner. Just give me more battery life. The iPhone 5, the 5, the 4, those bodies were fine. So if you can compress everything down into a thinner body, good. Make everything a little bit thinner, but then use that extra space left from that body design that nobody minded in the first place and just throw in more fucking battery. But they don't, because they don't care about it. I don't know what the fuck their plan is. I don't know what this whole push is for thinner. I don't understand. There's something going on there. I have some theories, but that's for another time. These companies do not care about the consumer, and Apple is in some real trouble because, again, if the question is laid out, do you want it with or without? Forget about everything else about the phone. And it's just a simple question. It's a yes or no. You don't, no need to get in particulars. Yes or no? Everybody's going to say yes. So how are you going to bring more people on when a feature that billions of phones around the world is going to have and that one's not going to have? How are you going to continue that growth? No, because Apple is trading like an anti-growth company, because that is, according to people at Financial Times, that's exactly what it is. Ooh. Ugly story. Ugly story. Lots of blockchain, lots of Apple. There's going to be some more Apple coming up later on in this episode. But man, not good. The iPhone 7, if you want it, you want it. Me? Hell, I'll go buy a Windows phone. Okay, no, I'm not going to go buy a Windows phone. What I tell you, what I would like to buy, if I could, is some gold and silver. Okay. Oh man, would I love to get my hands on some gold and silver, some real cold storage, something that has value, something that actually lasts a while instead of some phone that they want you to replace every 6 months to a year, 2 years at best. Ooh. And where I would get it from is Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. Where I have gotten it from is Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. They are the best in the world, okay? I want you to go to gold.zog.ninja, or you can go to rrbi.co. Either of those websites work, and just let them know that the Golden Stallion sent you. They know exactly what you're talking about because they've been a sponsor of the show for some time. They've listened to the show. The guy over there, Tim Fry, that's running it, class act, been in business. The place has been in business for decades. You cannot go wrong. You want all these different strategies, for holding on to your wealth. You want to take advantage of that. And I mean, it's fun, and they're nice to hold even too. Expensive, but at least they hold their value as to where, how's that iPhone 3S doing for you? Yeah, 1 ounce of silver is actually at a really good price right now. That's not expensive at all.
1 ounce, and you have more than you've had before.
Yeah, if you have 1 ounce now, you have more than you had before. Thank you to the lovely producer of the show, of course. Anyway, Roberts and Roberts Brokerage, rrbi.co. Go get your hands on some of those precious metals, baby. Woo! Let's get back to Sovryn Tech. Pixel, I'm being chased by assassin bots. I need an exit. Pixel!
Boy and Sovryn, come with me if you want to leave.
Who are you?
I'm Adelaide. I'll tell you more later. Get in the vehicle.
Get in a car with a scantily clad and beautiful woman? Guess it's been my first choice before. Let's go.
First choice.
It is time for First Choice, where I cover the stories that get sent in through the various channels available. Don't worry, folks, I'm professional. That are available, and of course, you can go to contact.zog.ninja for that. But really, it breaks down to Patreon, Twitter, and of course, the email address, all of which, and there's an email form. You don't even have to send me like a full-on email at contact.zog.ninja for that. So anyway, I'm going to be very, very quick on this. There was a big story coming out about the EM drive. This is, of course, a space technology getting far away from the blockchain technologies. Well, not far away. Blockchains in space. That's going to be a thing, if not already. But there's this EM drive, EM, electromagnetic, and supposedly China has been working on this. We mentioned it briefly in a past Sovryn Tech. Now, this is different from the Alcubierre drive, which we have talked about, which we debunked why that is never going to work. But that's more of a warp drive. This is not a warp drive. The problem with the EM drive, and again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. Okay, the EM drive breaks what is really a fundamental law of physics, okay? And that's the law of conservation of momentum, which, is kind of based, third law, Newton's third law: to each action there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? And the thing is, this has no propellant, and it's gone under some very interesting tests. I think there's already been tests in Germany that are considered by who did it who performed the test in Germany, that is considered to be largely legit. But there was anomalous momentum, apparently that somehow, this engine works. And so now somebody is going to be putting it onto one of those little CubeSats, like the size of a shoebox, and they are going to put an EM drive on that, and they are going to see if it actually has forward momentum without any kind of propulsion. Honestly, what I think is going on here, I think, I'll just say this straight, because it doesn't, on paper, the science does not add up. I think it's a shell game. I think that this is, China said that they have it, and so now everybody else is freaking out, and now they're testing it and saying that they got it to work. And I think both China and what the very sad colloquialism, Western civilization, are just kind of in a dick measuring contest, but they don't have a dick. So that's what I think really the EM drive is. I think I think it's bullshit. I could end up being wrong about that, but I get the sense that this is kind of this classic space race Cold War stuff where there's a claim back and forth. We have this technology. We're going to do this. You can't, yada, yada, yada. We got to seem like we're ahead of the game, blah, 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 blah. And, you kind of have a neo space race going on, but it's really just a shell game. So that's my guess on the EM drive, really until a lot more data comes in, so I'm not very excited about it. But anyway, that's enough of that. Let's get on with the rest of Sovryn Tech. I'll be right back. Hey, Live Read, I want to tell you, boy, if you want to hear more about science, I want you to listen to Sex and Science Hour. That is the podcast that the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy and I do. Yeah, there she is. We're going to be doing Season 3 here very soon, but Season 2 is still rolling. So you want to go to sexandsciencehour.com to hear more of that. All the sex and, all the science, baby. Hey, you want to slow down?
I don't do slow. I move fast.
Okay, well, so you're French.
Everyone in the future speaks French.
Wait. The future?
From 2099, Permanent Autonomous Zone, Osiris-1. You've been there.
Oh, this isn't happening. It only thinks it's happening. How do I know you're from Osiris-1?
RGP fingerprint Omega 746566666.
Okay, you're legit. Hey, really, be careful. You drive like you're playing a video game.
That is how you programmed me. Game talk.
It is time for Game Talk, where, baby, we talk video games. Oh, yes. In fact, I always say this. I'm a gamer first, a historian second, and I'm a tech journalist third. I say that all the time. And recently, I've gotten a lot of messages from people and emails saying, we'd like to hear more of Brian the historian. Well, I'm going to give you Brian the gamer right now. Gamer/tech journalist, really. But yeah, at some point, I'll figure out something. There's certainly plenty of demand for me to talk more about history, which I have in the past few episodes. But we'll get into some history maybe in future Sovereign Techs, or maybe I'll do some specials for Patreon. So you can look forward to that. We'll do, Brian's history class or something along those lines. But anyway, there was so much gaming news, as much as there was Apple news and even some blockchain news this week. There was a lot of gaming news that's very interesting. Now, one thing I'm not really going to talk about is the PlayStation Slim and the PlayStation Pro. These are the refreshes, what we originally thought were going to be called the PlayStation Neo, that are coming out soon in the next few months. I forget exactly when they said, but I will save that as a conversation for another time, because all of that is going to be able to run PlayStation VR, and of course that is a huge boon for VR in the household, in the living room across the world. So because PlayStation's huge in some countries that you just wouldn't believe, like in Eastern Europe and all that. So anyway, not going to talk about that. What I do want to start off talking about is there is something I have checked out that I think is actually, full pun intended, this is a game changer, and it is called NESbox, as in NES, Nintendo Entertainment System box. It is an emulator, but the interesting thing about it is that it is UWP. It's Universal Windows app, Universal Windows platform, and you can install it on a Windows 10 computer. You can install it on a Windows 10 mobile phone, or you could install it on an Xbox. Well, at least it should be coming to an Xbox soon. They haven't confirmed it for availability on Xbox. It really highlights, this is the same thing with Apple. When you control where you get the software from, you control what software can even get on your platform. If it can work on Windows 10 and Windows 10 Mobile, and it's verified for that, why the fuck not put it on the Xbox? And that's because, obviously, Microsoft is probably scared to death of what Nintendo might do, in retaliation, even though there's nothing illegal at all about creating emulator software. Not that I care about legalities, I'm an anarchist, but regardless, they're there, and people talk about the legality of, game ROMs and all this different stuff in emulators. And that's so true for Apple with the whole JAXX situation with Dash. That's why I keep talking about, I mentioned the F-Droid store earlier. The F-Droid store, if you don't already know, longtime listeners, of course, know about it. It's an entire alternative app repository and platform and app store. You can't buy anything, but they're all free, for Android devices. You don't have to use the Google Play Store, and I recommend that you don't. Okay, so, it's a really, really, that's so important that we get mobile devices to the point where PCs have been at traditionally, though with UWP, like with Windows, like with NESbox, you're kind of getting away from that, where you could just go to a website and download the software. I think if we could get used to that, but that's never going to happen on an iPhone. It's just never, ever going to happen. And so you don't have user choice. You do have the choice of buying an iPhone or an Android, of course, and I wouldn't take that choice away from you, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. Just understand you lose a lot of user choice when you get into platforms like that. Now, the NESbox, for what it is actually pretty good. It can play not just NES games, but Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Boy, and it works very well with an Xbox, or not very well, but it works with an Xbox 360 controller out of the box. That's the only one that it can work with, the only USB controller it can work with at the moment. And it can work with your keyboard, but the Xbox controller, there's a little bit of a problem, and they haven't addressed it yet. Where the B button on your Xbox, 360 or Xbox One controller, the B button just keeps sending you back. Like, it works like the back button. You can reprogram the keys, but you can't do anything about that B button. It's a very odd fluke that really makes what looks like a great emulator, it makes it kind of useless, because you really want that button configuration of A and B, and the Xbox controller is so good. It's a shame that you can't use it the way it was intended. So hopefully they'll fix that soon. But anyway, I just wanted you to know that that's out there. But that could get, if that does get allowed onto the Xbox just becomes like the ultimate emulating machine in your, it does very literally, I think, maybe become the greatest console of all time. Because you can play all those Xbox games, and then you can play that. I mean, really, the PC is still the greatest gaming machine overall, which is probably what Project Scorpio is going to be. Anyway, I'm getting all over the place. I just want you to know that that's out there and has some very interesting implications, the Nestbox UWP app. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about the big news. And in fact, honestly, this was, I think, considering the collective eye roll that came out of the announcement of the iPhone 7, other than from, the Apple diehards, and whatever, you're an Apple diehard, that's fine, okay? Other than from them, from the rest of the world, there was something that a lot of people got real envious about, and a part of it that they thought was, that really stole the show, even not that it was a great presentation overall, but Shigeru Miyamoto came out. And that was amazing. I can't remember the last time, really seeing him on such a big American stage. Now, of course, Shigeru Miyamoto is, one of the biggest, if not the biggest wig. I mean, he's not CEO, but, at Nintendo, he created Mario, Zelda. Yeah, I mean, you go down the list, a lot of the big properties, Pikmin, all of them. I mean, he is the man behind Nintendo and the greatest games that the company has ever made. He is certainly a role model for me as I am a game developer. I mean, everybody kind of looks up to Shigeru Miyamoto, and just such a nice guy. And what happened is that he came out on stage and he announced a Mario game for iOS, that being Super Mario Run. Now, when I first heard this, it was met with just, everybody went nuts when this happened. And in fact, understand this, is that most people, like I said, thought the Apple presentation was an eye roll, except for everything that Nintendo had to say. Nintendo really, we talk about Apple being an anti-growth company. Nintendo is quite the opposite. And in fact, that same Financial Times article that I was reading from earlier talked about how Nintendo is really going through the roof right now. And they're able to do that, not because I don't agree with them using, their intellectual property, heavyweighting, that we've talked about in recent episodes of Sovryn Tech with some of the fan-made games that they use Nintendo properties and all that, but that they've so carefully cultivated, they've stuck so much to their guns, they've been genuinely innovative forever, that when they when they go to any other company, that other company listens, and they listen good. They were the big deal. When Mario, even at the Olympics, when Mario made an appearance at the Olympics, people lost their shit. That's probably what everybody will always remember the Brazil, the Summer Olympics for, is when, the Prime Minister of Japan came out as Mario, and went through the way. It was funny. Anyway, I watched that part, at least. This is a huge deal. That Super Mario Run is coming, is coming to iOS. Now, eventually, it's a time, they have a time exclusivity on it, okay? Eventually, it will come out for Android as well, I'm sure. But, it looks like, kind of your classic Mario game. It's sort of a runner, which is a popular style of mobile game. But the interesting thing here is, and you've got to give Nintendo some credit for this, in my opinion. Because runner games, endless runners, as they're known, I don't know if this one will be endless, but runner games are notorious for IAP, for in-app purchases. And just there's people I remember that Simpsons runner, the endless runner game for the Simpsons. There's people that spent literally thousands and thousands of dollars on that game. For Nintendo to release Super Mario Run at a flat price, at a set price, they didn't say what that set price was, but to release it at a set price, I thought that was a class act. Absolutely. And they know they're going to make money. Everybody went nuts. That was not, what we saw this past week was not an Apple event. That was a Nintendo event, folks. Because also what they announced is that for the new Apple Watch, which is coming out, which, as far as my review of the Apple Watch, yeah, it's still not as independent a device as I would like. They've added in a few things to it, a better, more localized GPS and all that. But it's still not enough of what I want. Because I really want that watch that can completely replace my phone. And I'm kind of hoping that that Angelfish, which should be the watch that, the Pixel watch or whatever, that Google will be announcing, their in-house watch, that they'll probably be announcing on October 4th at that event, where they'll also be likely releasing their new phones, or whether they will be. I think that's pretty much a fact now. But anyway, they announced for watch, Nintendo did, that Pokemon Go they will release an Apple Watch app of Pokemon Go. So you could play Pokemon Go on your Apple Watch. Bingo. Win. That is such a brilliant idea. And I've talked about this, how watch gaming, I'm actually, I said this earlier, or like a year ago or so, or whenever it was that version of not Asteroids, it was Pong. When Pong came out for the Apple Watch, I said, I am really looking at pivoting Zomi Offline Games, my game company, to making watch games, because I think that there's a big deal, big thing to happen there. But don't worry, Hyperchronius 2 is still coming out. Relax. But anyway, I mean, this is a big freaking deal, and it's kind of funny. Game and Watch, you just hear that, and yeah, you're going to have a game on a watch. So Nintendo is getting ahead of the. What's funny about this though? Everything that's being explained here, mobile gaming, games on a watch, all this stuff. Nintendo did all of this 30 years ago. Literally 30 years ago. That's why I say they are the company of innovation. Apple is not the company of innovation. Nintendo completely stole the show. And their stock price proved it. Is where Apple was still flat, because, and I don't blame investors for being skittish about the headphone jack situation. Okay, while Apple is still flat, Nintendo's going up, baby. And it's interesting too, because I still don't understand what relationship exactly Nintendo has to where they can claim that an app not made by Nintendo but made by Niantic, that being Pokemon Go, where is it their claim to say that can go on a watch? But I think it's going to be some cross-pollination, and they're going to learn how to put games on watches as well. So, but I expect both of those abilities to not be exclusive to the Apple platform. Eventually, they'll go to the Android platform as well. But it needs probably that better GPS system to where Pokemon Go can work, on a smartwatch. So that's happening. But man, it was huge news. Understand me. That was a Nintendo event that we saw this week. They stole the show. If there's any reason that people will consider this holiday season to be Apple still really viable, outside of the people that are really bought into the Apple ecosystem and all that, it is going to be because of Nintendo and Nintendo alone. It has nothing to do, with the hardware. So I thought it was absolutely fascinating that happened. And like I said, watch gaming, I think that's going to be making a very serious comeback. And with the Apple Watch, that's the other thing with the Apple Watch, is I was really hoping that the Apple Watch 1 would be something that lasts a few years. In fact, they didn't even announce the Gold Edition one, whatever they call that. They didn't announce that, so I think they're steering clear of releasing that gold watch. And that might be because they are going to have to integrate new technologies into watches to be able to take advantage of the new kinds of augmented reality-ish games like Pokemon Go have. So in many ways, some of Nintendo's creations, which Pokemon, even though it's sort of its own company now, it is a Nintendo creation in many ways at the end of the day. Just, it's amazing to watch the wheel of innovation, kind of turn, or should I say the cycle of it, or not the cycle, but the cyclone, to where it's like going up steps and circular steps, and you just keep retreading the same kind of air, but you're just a little bit higher. And man, Nintendo was so far ahead of the game, still are.
In every age, a technology is created that upends the foundations of society. The wheel, the printing press, the internet. Now, in a world sliding into financial chaos, a new technology is changing the way monetary systems work around the world. It is called Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a new form of money, controlled not by banks, governments, or corporations, but through mutual commerce between free individuals. To learn more, visit WeUseCoins.com.
Pixel says it should be this panel.
We need to hack into the control center to shut down all of those assassin bots.
Well, you're the android. Can't you just jack in?
Oui. But the way I connect is more like a jack off.
Was that a joke?
Hacking is no joke.
Directly connecting certainly beats doing it with the keyboard.
You're notorious for your love of cyber sex.
Okay, now that was a joke. Just get hacking.
A quick hack solves everything. Hacksack.
It is time for HackSec, where we talk issues of hacking and security, and we've got a hell of a story to get into. But before I do, I just want to make a last comment on with Nintendo. I talked about how carefully they curated, their properties, for lack of a better word, and their characters and all that, and how that's really allowed them to be a success now. I cannot stress this enough. Today, there is the one thing that seems to be lacking from everything is a sense of history, and I think that's why so many companies are looking to cash in on 90s nostalgia, releasing new versions, new mediums of entertainment for properties from way back when and all that, because there's that sense of history. And to have, Nintendo just really has that better than anybody else, because they always stuck to their guns. And even when sales weren't doing great, they still kept making, Mario games. They still kept making Zelda games, and they didn't mind waiting 5 years. They don't care if there's not a new Zelda game, unless like every 7 years or something. They're so careful with it that prestige carries on to the stage, and it carries on to any other platform that they decide to go to. And I think it will carry on, like we talked about last week, how the console's effectively going to die, except for Nintendo. But them sticking to their morals, their principles, their own personal business principles, they're going to win in the end, no matter what. What a company! Since episode 1 of Sovryn Tech, I've talked about Nintendo. I don't agree with how they strong arm their IP. Okay, but just the fact that this is a company that does not pay attention to the competition whatsoever, it really has given them a lot of just a huge edge to where they can step out onto Apple's stage and they can blow Apple out of the water. Even though their presentation, like Shigeru, as great as he is, didn't do it wasn't like the most exciting kind of presentation, but it was just like, holy shit, that's Mario at an Apple event. Yeah, I mean, that's all it took. Anyway, we've got a story here that I want to read about, that I want to read quickly, and because I think it has some very serious implications, and it proves a lot of points that we've brought up on Sovryn Tech in the past. So here it is. This is from Andy Greenberg at Wired. Google's clever plan to stop aspiring ISIS recruits. Google has built a $500 billion business out of divining what people want based on a few words they type into a search field. In the process, it stumbled on a powerful tool for getting inside the minds of some of the least understood and most dangerous people on the internet, potential ISIS recruits. Now I'm reading from the story, of course. Now, one subsidiary of Google is trying not just to understand those would-be jihadis' intentions, but to change them. JAXX, the Google-owned tech incubator and think tank, until recently known as Google Ideas, has been working over the past year to develop a new program it hopes can use a combination of Google's search advertising algorithms and YouTube's video platform to target aspiring ISIS recruits and ultimately dissuade them from joining the group's cult of apocalyptic violence. The program, which JAXX calls the Redirect Method and plans to launch in a new phase this month, places advertising alongside results for any keywords and phrases that JAXX has determined people attracted to ISIS commonly search for. Those ads link to Arabic and English language YouTube channels that pull together pre-existing videos JAXX believes can effectively undo ISIS's brainwashing. Clips like testimonials from former extremists, imams denouncing ISIS's corruption of Islam, and surreptitiously filmed clips inside the group's dysfunctional caliphate in northern Syria and Iraq. Quote, this came out of an observation that there's a lot of online demand for ISIS material, but there are also a lot of credible, organic voices online debunking their narratives, end quote, says Yasmin Green, JAXX's head of research and development. Quote, the redirect method is at its heart a targeted advertising campaign. Let's take these individuals who are vulnerable to ISIS's recruitment messaging and instead show them information that refutes it. The result The results in a pilot project Jigsaw ran early this year were surprisingly effective. Over the course of about 2 months, more than 300,000 people were drawn to the anti-ISIS YouTube channels. Searchers actually clicked on Jigsaws 3 or 4 times more often than a typical ad campaign. Those who clicked spent more than twice as long viewing the most effective playlists than the best estimates of how long people view YouTube as a whole. And this month, along with the London-based startup Moonshot Countering Violent Extremism and the U.S.-based Gen Next Foundation, Jigsaw plans to relaunch the program in a second phase that will focus its method on North American extremists, applying the method to both potential ISIS recruits and violent white supremacists. Now, I'm just going to stop the story right there. I do not support, I do not support the use of lethal force. I do not support violent revolutions at all. I don't entertain the idea for anything. I do not support ISIS. But let's be clear here. Remove the word ISIS from that. Just take any mention of ISIS or, any kind of mention of Islam in that article, and I want you to replace it with anything else. Replace it with anarchist. Replace it with, go down the political spectrum. Replace it with conservative. Replace it with liberal. How do you feel about that then? How do you feel about Jigsaw's redirect, redirect motion? How do you feel, or redirect method? How do you feel about redirect method then? Doesn't that sound like a propaganda machine? Oh, well, that's great that they're using it against ISIS and, to stop extremism and perhaps some, violent actions and from buildings getting blown up. But what happens when a technology like that gets used elsewhere? Now, I hope I don't even have to say just how scary that is. Jigsaw, this itself is terrifying to me, because Google Ideas, we exposed Google Ideas on Sovryn Tech years ago because it is effectively a State Department within Google. Understand that this is here, flip the board one more time. Okay. What if Google supported ISIS and used this to work against America? What then? Is this okay then? And please, folks, as somebody who is a veteran of the U.S. Army, I can tell you, that the U.S. is quite the invader in many countries. And I would certainly, if I were a tech company and I was, patriotic in some other country, I would definitely want to redirect people away from thinking that, the U.S. Army is some kind of good guy. What then? How do you feel about that? Google, I'll just cut right to the chase. Google is an arm of the state because they are purposely using their technologies to forward a narrative for the United States of America. How else can you interpret that? Please, Google fanboys, I know I have some that listen to the show. You get in touch with me. You tell me how this isn't that. And it's disgusting to name that company, to name Google Ideas, to name it, first off, Google Ideas, because it wasn't about ideas. It was a 3-part company, all of which had to do with working with law enforcement, and like tracking weapons movements, with terrorists and all this different stuff. And to name it Jigsaw as a part of Alphabet, good old AlphaGoog, right? This would be the letter J. It's saying it's putting together pieces of the puzzle. What puzzle are they putting together? And naming it Jigsaw just makes it seem so benign. But this is not a benign subject whatsoever. Is it? How else could this be used? How else based upon your browsing habits? Oh, it's so great. I love it that Google and Facebook, they target their ads at me and they're just showing me things I want to buy. Well, they might also be, targeting you away from finding about the ideas of liberty. How about that? Or they might be targeting you away from finding out about the truth about some of the bullshit that Google does or some other corporatist, fucks do, or that some governments do perhaps. This is a very, very large and ugly sword that swings both ways. I've been claiming for some time, and believe me, I used to be a Google fanboy, but I've been claiming for some time on this show, WikiLeaks has been trying to prove it, and a whole bunch of others, to say, look, Google is absolutely working in concert with the U.S. government, okay? And a ton of Google fanboys, oh, that's conspiracy theory, oh, that's not true, what is this? You can't tell me that it's not. Well, I'm glad. Yeah, like I said, I'm glad that it might be stopping some violence and from some people dying somewhere. But I mean, this is classic, and really, this is psychological operations on steroids. And I say that with the confidence of somebody who was in psychological operations when they're in the Army. Don't tell me they're not an arm of the state, and they will use all of your search data. They'll use everything they can on you, and they will, they'll point you in the direction they want you to go. I've mentioned this before. No matter how many times you enter the word anarchism into Google search, you'll never get a Google Now card about anarchism. It just will not happen. In fact, I had one person comment to me that the closest thing, and I love the way they put this, they said the only thing that was tangentially related to anarchism that they ended up getting when, in a Google search or on a Google Now card was Chris Cantwell. And folks, if you don't know who that is no anarchist, baby. There is no peace love in there. No, Google's an arm of the state. So are most of these other large companies. It's corporatism en masse. There you have it. Let's build the systems that exist outside of it. Start using DuckDuckGo for starters. Get the fuck away from this company. I'm telling you, because this kind of shit's going to be happening. And tell your friends. Say, hey, baby, using DuckDuckGo, that turns me on. Turns me on. Fuck, I'll tell you that. I ever see anybody using DuckDuckGo, my nipples. I get excited. Let's start sending out that narrative and see what the fuck they can do about that. Anyway, I'll be back with some more Sovryn Tech.
The reviews are in, and Babylon 5's a winner. The New York Daily News says Babylon 5 could make Star Wars look like a walk in the park. The Chicago Sun-Times calls it a welcome addition to the sci-fi universe. Impressive, perfectly scaled for TV, raves the LA Times. And the Kansas City Star says Babylon 5 is one space station you're likely to want to visit frequently. See for yourself what everyone's talking about on Babylon 5.
Babylon 5 is available for download on your favorite torrent site. See it now to experience the greatest show in television history. Babylon 5.
Adelaide, why are we stopping?
In the future, we have a custom.
What's the custom?
After a successful mission, a team usually is love, a ménage à trois, or orgy.
Yeah, there's only two of us.
I already contacted the others to come join us. I love women too.
Whoa, Adelaide, you're beautiful, but you're an android.
I am fully functional. I am programmed in multiple techniques, a broad variety of...
Wow, I guess so. You did say you move fast. Adelaide, the future is going to be so good.
The climax.
It is time for the climax. Woo! Where I get to talk about whatever I want to talk about, but this is an extremely shortened section because we had to get in so much information. But all I want to say is happy 50th. Happy 50th to my favorite, I don't know how I want to put that. One of my favorite franchises, how about that? Perhaps the most influential television show of all time. And that was on September 8th, 1966, even though The Cage came out before that, was the original airing of The Man Trap of Star Trek, the original series. Captain Kirk is an absolute role model for me. I've never shied away from this on Sovryn Tech. I've talked about it many times. It's just, I was just a little Jewish boy growing up in New York, and I got to see this, Jewish Canadian man, captain of Starship, and it changed my life forever. And technology has so much to thank. The tech world as a whole has so much to thank Star Trek for. Most people, I've said this before, but pretty much any time you ask anybody that's a real tech enthusiast what got you into it, they will tell you Star Trek instantaneously. It is just so influential. CBS and Paramount, unfortunately, have completely dropped the ball, I think, this year, largely with the 50th anniversary. Star Trek Beyond was a great movie. I've already talked about that. Can't wait for the new TV show, Star Trek Discovery. Star Trek is alive and well, but as far as when you've got something that's 50 years old, there should have been a whole lot more done, and they didn't do it. But I will say it on Star Trek, or I will say it on Sovryn Tech, that absolutely happy 50th to Star Trek, and here is to 50 more that I can't wait to experience, and I certainly plan on being here for all 50 and beyond. Just love Star Trek. And there's a whole bunch of stories, speaking of Facebook, that I could get into with the whole Star Trek thing. Facebook tried to do some stuff with it, but their algorithms completely failed. Like they had these emojis, these custom, emotion emojis that you can choose from instead of like, and they made Star Trek ones, and they said they'd only give it to select, or, to people that showed that they like Star Trek. Folks, the amount of times I talk about Star Trek, you think I talk about it a lot on Sovryn Tech? I mean, I post about it nonstop. I make references to it nonstop. I put up pictures of me in Starfleet uniforms, of which I have multiple, and I didn't get those. I mean, so if anything, that's almost a comfort. The 50th anniversary of Star Trek is a comfort to the fact that sometimes these algorithms suck ass. They just suck ass, and Facebook doesn't know that much about you. Great. I am so happy for that. But anyway, happy 50th Star Trek. And here's to 50 more. So that's enough for this week. I do want to recommend, if you want to, please, patreon.com/Sovryn